If you remember the lecture where we talked about mono behavior, I said that we will use functions from mono behavior to fetch components from our game objects. Well, now it's the time to do so. If we go here in Unity, I have imported our player sprite, and I will show you how can we slice it in order to get this player inside of our scene. And don't worry, we will do this more in detail when we import our sprites. Now just click and drag our player sprite that I have provided, and then here in the inspector panel, just set the sprite mode to be multiple, and then click here in the sprite editor. After that, click slice, and then click apply. It will slice all of our sprites the same way it did here. And now we can just, take one of these players here and drag and drop them here into our scene, and that way I have our player here in the scene. If we look here in the inspector panel, we have a couple of, properties from that, game object. We see that we have a transform, we have a sprite render, and we have the script that I have attached on our player. Now we will use the script or mono behavior to fetch the transform from our game object and move our player in the scene. Now let us see how can we access the transform property from our script. Over here in our script, in the update method, and we see that we have a comment here. It says update is called once per frame. Here we will take or create a vector3 variable, and it's equal to transform.position. So we are using transform.position property from mono behavior to access the transform property here in the hierarchy panel and its position property here. We want to move the player on the x-axis, and we see that when I move the player, he moves in the scene. We can also see that in our game view. So when I move the player, he moves left and right. Now let us see how can we do that in code. Now here we will say temp.x and we will multiply it. We will use the shorthand assignment operator, so we can say plus equals 1. For example, this is equivalent to saying temp.x is equal to temp.x plus 1. It's the same thing. But here we will multiply it. We will say plus equals 0.5f times time.delta time. And we need to reassign this variable temp back to our transform.position. So now, if I run the program, we will see that our player is slowly moving on the right side. If I typed minus equals here, so instead of plus equals, if I typed minus equals, the player would move on the left side. Now this was just a short and simple example of how can we use our script to access our components and manipulate our game objects in the scene. We don't even have enough to start with, but later on, when we begin to, program our game, we will add rigid bodies. So here we can go into physics 2D, add rigid bodies, add collision detectors, our box collider or circle collider to our game objects to detect collision. And later on, we will see how can we access these properties from our script using getComponent. But as I said, this was just a simple example of how can we use mono behavior or our script to access our components and manipulate our game objects in the scene.